The compound sat empty under the October heat. Dust swirled between abandoned buildings. Silence pressed down like a weight. Then came the sound of boots. Heavy. Deliberate. Different from what the women hiding inside had learned to fear. For 3 years, those footsteps had meant only pain. Violence walking toward them. But these boots carried a different rhythm, a different purpose. Through bamboo cracks, frightened eyes glimpsed unfamiliar uniforms. Not the khaki they knew. These were olive drab. Strange voices spoke words they couldn't understand. American soldiers moved through the ruins. Weapons ready, but lowered. One stopped near her hiding place. She pressed her eyes shut, braced for the brutality she knew was coming. Instead, a voice came. Gentle, uncertain. It's okay. We're Americans. You're safe now. Safe. The word meant nothing to women trapped in Japan's shadow system. Women who had forgotten that strangers could offer kindness instead of cruelty. What those soldiers found that day would shake even battle-hardened veterans. They had uncovered one of the war's most hidden crimes. A system built on secrecy and suffering that stretched across Asia for over a decade. The machinery had been constructed years before this moment, back in 1932, when Japan seized Manchuria. Military planners created what they called comfort stations. Behind that cold name lay a network of exploitation. Tens of thousands of young women were pulled into it. Many barely past childhood. Some tricked with promises of factory work. Others seized from homes in darkness. They came from Korea, from China, from the Philippines, later from Indonesia and Malaya, even from Pacific Islands. Once taken, they vanished into compounds designed for secrecy. Each facility followed identical patterns. Wooden barracks surrounded by wire or bamboo. Guard towers watching every angle. Central offices staffed by military overseers. These stations were placed far from civilian eyes. Escape became impossible. Discovery unlikely. Inside, the women's lives shrank to schedules and surveillance. Enforced silence. Constant fear. The Japanese military claimed necessity. Commanders insisted it prevented random attacks on civilians, that it preserved troop morale during long campaigns. But reality was darker than any justification. What they called discipline became systematic violation. What they claimed was protection became organized enslavement. By 1937, the network exploded across China. Nanking, Shanghai, Hong Kong. Every major garrison established its own station. When the Pacific War erupted, these facilities spread from Manchuria to the Solomon Islands. Wherever Japanese troops marched, comfort stations followed. Psychological control proved as ruthless as physical violence. Women were told repeatedly that no one would come for them, that families had abandoned them, that escape meant execution. Years of conditioning crushed hope to dust. Even when battle sounds thundered outside, many believed liberation was fantasy. The secrecy was absolute. Official records were coded or destroyed. Survivors were ordered never to speak of their past. Shame was designed to silence them even if they lived. This deliberate erasure was part of the plan. The system didn't just exploit bodies, it sought to annihilate identity itself. By 1944, the war was crushing Japan. American submarines strangled supply lines. Allied bombers burned cities to ash. Yet inside the compounds, nothing changed. Women remained locked behind bamboo walls, convinced the world had forgotten them. As American forces advanced across the Philippines, Japanese commanders fled their garrisons. Soldiers melted into jungles, leaving behind the very women they'd claimed were essential. For those trapped, the sudden silence felt terrifying. Abandonment didn't feel like freedom. It felt like waiting for massacre. This was the world American troops entered when they found those first compounds. They expected ammunition stores, hidden snipers, booby traps. Instead, they encountered women whose eyes carried years of hopelessness. Women who flinched at kindness because they'd learned only cruelty. The comfort station system had been built to vanish into empire's shadows. Yet in war's final years, its existence could no longer be hidden. The world was about to learn the scale of what had been done. And the women themselves would become living witnesses to one of history's most concealed crimes. The tide had turned by late 1944. American counterattacks rolled westward, island by island, pushing closer to Japan's homeland. In October, General MacArthur's promised return to the Philippines began with landings on Leyte. Battles raged across beaches and jungles. Japanese garrisons cracked under relentless pressure. What they abandoned revealed the hidden machinery of occupation. American soldiers advancing inland expected ambushes and ammunition caches, desperate last stands. Instead, in remote compounds, they found signs of hurried flight. Rice scattered across kitchen floors, barracks deserted but still warm, and in the shadows the first whispers of an unimaginable truth. Near Tacloban, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Hayes led the 302nd Infantry Regiment into what seemed a minor enemy installation. Men moved cautiously through the silence, rifles raised, searching for snipers. Then from behind a wooden building came muffled sounds of movement. Hayes's men pried open the door. What they saw stunned veterans who thought they'd witnessed every war's cruelty. Dozens of women crouched in corners, malnourished, terrified, clothes hanging in tatters, faces marked by unmistakable trauma. They recoiled at the sight of Americans, bowed their heads expecting punishment. For moments the soldiers froze. They'd been trained for combat, not for this. Reports raced up command chains. Division headquarters noted with disbelief that these weren't Filipino civilians, nor captured enemy nurses. They were young women from Korea, China, other occupied territories. Their presence raised questions soldiers couldn't answer. What system had placed them here, hidden within a military compound? Private Daniel Martinez was among the first inside. He remembered how women knelt on the ground, heads lowered, refusing to look at their supposed rescuers. When he offered food, they flinched. When he tried to help one stand, she recoiled in terror, convinced a blow was coming. Martinez realized then the depth of their conditioning. To these women, every soldier was a threat. Liberation was unthinkable. Similar discoveries multiplied as other units pushed across Leyte. Compounds thought to house supply depots revealed themselves as comfort stations. Each showed the same pattern. Women of diverse origins held in secrecy. Health broken. Trust destroyed. The scale began emerging piece by piece, in testimonies of the liberated, in shocked reports of the men who found them. The psychological impact on soldiers was profound. Hardened infantrymen, accustomed to jungle warfare's brutality, were unprepared for this horror. One captain wrote in his diary that the sight shook him more than any battlefield. These weren't casualties of crossfire. They were victims of organized policy. The realization spread quickly. This was no isolated atrocity, but a deliberate structure maintained across the empire. Intelligence officers gathering accounts began piecing together outlines. Women told they'd never be rescued. Guards enforcing silence and obedience. Escape made impossible. That these women still lived, though broken and frail, was itself astonishing. Their survival stood as testimony to human resilience and evidence of hidden crime. For the women, those first moments weren't joy, but terror. Liberation came cloaked in disbelief. They couldn't comprehend that strangers in unfamiliar uniforms might bring safety rather than pain. It would take time, days, weeks, before truth settled in. But in October 1944 on Leyte, the first cracks appeared in secrecy's wall. The world was beginning to see what had been hidden in shadows for over a decade. First contact demanded extraordinary patience. American soldiers had been trained to storm bunkers, seize objectives, fight through ambushes. Nothing prepared them for rooms filled with silent, trembling women who recoiled from every gesture. To reach them required different courage. At Tacloban, medics were brought forward, weapons lowered, helmets removed. Soldiers crouched low, speaking in calm tones, though women didn't understand the language. The message was carried not by words but by posture, by offered food, by soft hands of men who hours earlier had been hardened in combat. Still, women hesitated. For years, survival had meant obedience and silence. They'd been told every soldier was the same, that uniforms always meant danger. When Private Martinez extended a ration tin, the nearest woman shrank back. Only when a nurse approached with gentle voice and steady hands did the woman finally accept food. Medical teams became essential. Army nurses like Captain Helen Morrison quickly recognized standard procedures couldn't apply. To order examination, undressing triggered terror. To shine flashlights into eyes brought memories of interrogation. Medical staff adapted. Examinations performed slowly, step by step. Female personnel whenever possible. Interpreters were sought, though few spoke necessary languages. One such interpreter, Sergeant Grace Kimura, became a lifeline. Japanese American serving with Military Intelligence Service. Fluent in Japanese, she could reach Korean survivors forced to learn that language during captivity. At first, her presence startled them. A Japanese face in American uniform seemed another trick, another deception layer. But when she spoke Korean explaining she was American-born in Hawaii, their fear began softening. These first care deployments were improvisations. No manuals existed for healing bodies ravaged by years of abuse or for restoring stolen dignity. Medical officers documented malnutrition so severe some women weighed less than 80 pounds. Others suffered untreated infections, open wounds, diseases unchecked for years. Physical damage was staggering. Yet what shocked Americans most was psychological ruin. Women flinched at kindness, knelt as though awaiting punishment. Even boot sounds on gravel sent them into silence. Still, slowly progress came. Hot soup bowls, clean blankets, the simple act of being left alone in privacy. These were revolutionary gestures for women who'd known only control. Maria Santos, a Filipina survivor, later remembered the moment she was given soap and water, allowed to wash without being watched. For her, that single act proved more powerful than safety promises. It was freedom's first taste. As American forces advanced across the Philippines, each new compound revealed the same pattern. Soldiers cleared buildings, secured perimeters, then handed tasks to medical and relief teams. Combat missions shifted into humanitarian rescues. The Army was discovering not just prisoners, but evidence of a system defying imagination. Resource deployment extended beyond battlefields. Evacuation hospitals were reorganized to care for women rather than wounded soldiers. Protocols were rewritten in real time. Recognizing trauma required gentler hands than combat medicine usually allowed. Even as fighting raged miles away, tents filled with survivors became sanctuaries of fragile hope. For soldiers, the shock was lasting. They'd expected enemies. They found survivors. In the fragile trust of those women, they glimpsed both the system's cruelty and possibility of its undoing. What began in fear was slowly, painfully turning toward recognition. Liberation was real. But its meaning would take time to unfold. Revelation came not in single instants, but in waves of discoveries striking soldiers and medical staff equally. What they found inside comfort stations was more than human suffering. It was evidence of a system designed with chilling precision to strip away hope, identity, and dignity. Army doctors began examinations with grim faces. Malnutrition was universal. Women barely weighed more than children. Bones pressed against skin. Stomachs couldn't digest normal rations after years of starvation diets. Medical charts filled with notes of untreated diseases, syphilis, gonorrhea, chronic infections left to spread unchecked. Women bore scars of repeated violence. Yet more haunting than physical damage was the silence. The way survivors avoided eye contact as if kindness itself were unthinkable. Captain Morrison at Tacloban recalled how women resisted even simple care. They wouldn't eat unless ordered. Wouldn't sleep lying down, instead curling on ground as though waiting for commands. When asked to remove clothing for treatment, they froze in terror, convinced punishment would follow. Morrison wrote she'd never seen human beings so conditioned to submission. To treat them required breaking every military medicine routine. Horror's climax wasn't measured in numbers, but in moments. A young Korean woman, her frame wasted, flinched at a doctor's stethoscope sight. Another burst into tears when given clean clothing, unable to believe it was offered freely. A Filipina survivor later said the first time she was left alone unguarded to wash herself with soap and water, she realized the nightmare might finally be ending. That privacy moment meant more than food, more than shelter. It meant humanity restored. For soldiers hardened by jungle battles and kamikaze assaults, these scenes were harder to face than combat. Martinez remembered how one woman pressed her forehead to ground, begging for punishment, unable to imagine mercy. He said it broke his heart more than any firefight. Other veterans admitted they could never erase those room images from memory. As more stations were uncovered, scope became undeniable. This wasn't isolated atrocity committed by rogue units. It was systemic, organized, enforced by command. Intelligence officers pieced together testimonies. Women taken from homes, deceived with false promises, transported across seas, forced into barracks hidden within military compounds. Empire's machinery had turned their bodies into war instruments. Discovery's climax also carried terrible recognition weight. These survivors weren't simply circumstance victims. They were survivors of deliberate structure that calculated their suffering as strategy part. Soldiers who uncovered them were forced to confront crime beyond battlefield. Crime revealing the war's very soul. Even as shells thundered in distance and air raids lit skies above Leyte, the true battle in those compounds was for dignity restoration. Each compassion gesture, hot soup bowl, blanket, smile offered without demand was a blow against the system thriving on cruelty. Each record entered into medical charts. Each testimony whispered through interpreters became part of larger truth the world would one day face. In those October and November 1944 days, the comfort station's hidden world stood exposed. Soldiers who witnessed it couldn't remain unchanged. The climax wasn't only women's liberation. It was unveiling one of Pacific War's darkest secrets. Truth that would echo far beyond battlefield. Liberation wasn't ending. It was another struggle's beginning. One measured not in battles fought, but in lives rebuilt or broken further after captivity years. For women stepping hesitantly from those compounds, freedom came wrapped in uncertainty. Army medical units scrambled, creating treatment protocols. Nutritional rehabilitation began slowly, with small meals carefully prepared, avoiding overwhelming weakened bodies. Doctors charted progress, noting each gained pound, each treated infection. Yet they also recorded what medicine couldn't heal: night terrors shaking tents, silence stretching for hours, flinches at boot sounds or shouted orders. These wounds couldn't be stitched shut. Psychological trauma proved the greatest challenge. Survivors had been conditioned to expect pain with every interaction. Nurses discovered ordinary gestures, asking a woman to lie on bed, offering her new dress, could trigger panic. To rebuild trust required patience, and time was resource war rarely allowed. Still, medical staff adapted. Female personnel conducted examinations. Interpreters explained each procedure. Every effort was made, returning some control measure to those who'd known none. Beyond hospitals, the question of home loomed. For many, repatriation was fraught with fear. Some longed returning to villages in Korea or China, but worried they'd face rejection. Others discovered families had been killed or displaced, leaving them nowhere to go. Few chose remaining in Philippines, preferring anonymity in foreign land to shame in homeland. Cultural restoration became recovery part. Relief workers provided traditional foods when possible: Korean rice dishes, Chinese teas, Filipino fruits, to rekindle identity sense. Clothing was offered reflecting their heritage, small but powerful step against years of erasure. Religious services were arranged in multiple languages. For some, the chance to pray freely after prohibition, years restored dignity deeper than any medical treatment could provide. Still, stigma clung to their lives like shadow. In traditional societies, sexual violence carried shame not upon perpetrators, but upon victims. Many women couldn't speak of their ordeal. Some returned home only to conceal their pasts, marrying and raising families in silence. Others disappeared into anonymity, unwilling to relive memories. Liberation had freed their bodies, but not always their voices. American authorities, working with international relief groups, established programs for those who couldn't return. Vocational training, resettlement assistance, continued medical care. Yet these efforts, though vital, could never fully erase what had been endured. Survivors themselves would later testify recovery wasn't measured in months or years, but in lifetimes. For soldiers who'd witnessed liberation, the aftermath also lingered. Many carried diaries filled with memories they couldn't forget. One officer wrote he'd fought through 3 campaigns, but the women's haunted eyes remained war's clearest image. Another recalled every kindness act he offered in those days felt like battle against the very cruelty they'd uncovered. Aftermath was paradox. Liberation had shattered captivity walls, but beyond those walls lay world unprepared to understand, unready to accept. Women walked into freedom carrying burdens few could see, and fewer still were willing to acknowledge. Their survival itself was extraordinary. Their healing would demand courage beyond imagination. What began on Leyte in October 1944 was more than rescue. It was opening chapter of long, unfinished story, of recovery, of silence, of voices that would one day rise demanding remembrance. Comfort Women's liberation did more than free individuals from captivity. It forced the world confronting hidden crime. One so carefully concealed, even hardened soldiers could scarcely believe what they'd uncovered. In years that followed, those discoveries' legacy would echo across history. shaping memory justice and the fight for human dignity. Military reports written in 1944 and 1945 became first official records of Japan's sexual slavery system. Testimonies from nurses, doctors, and intelligence officers documented what they'd seen: malnourished women, untreated diseases, eyes trained to expect only punishment. These reports, stored in archives, ensured evidence couldn't be erased. They became foundation for later recognition, shield against denial. But survivors themselves were true witnesses. Some chose silence, seeking to rebuild lives in privacy. Others, after decades of carrying memories alone, stepped forward to speak. In Seoul, in Manila, in Taipei. Elderly women told their stories to journalists, to courts, to students who'd never known war. Their voices cracked with age, but words carried generations' weight. They demanded the world remember not only their suffering, but their survival. Legacy was also personal. Many survivors married, raised families, and worked quietly in communities. Their children often sensed strength without knowing its source. One survivor's daughter later wrote, "My mother never spoke of the war, but I saw it in her hands, in her eyes." Whatever she'd endured made her stronger, not weaker. These silent legacies lived on in care gestures, in resilience passed to new generations. Internationally, revelations influenced war laws. Organized sexual slavery documentation contributed to post-war tribunals and later to Geneva Conventions, shaping how the world defined crimes against humanity. Shock experienced by American soldiers became part of larger awakening. That women's violation in wartime wasn't unfortunate byproduct, but deliberate weapon. That recognition marked turning point in humanitarian law. Yet legacy is also contested. For decades, survivors struggled against denial and silence. Some governments resisted acknowledgement, fearing shame or political consequence. Women themselves bore proof burden, carrying scars as their only testimony. Still, they persisted. By late 20th century, their voices had risen into chorus that could no longer be ignored. They demanded not only remembrance, but justice. Today, their stories serve as warning. They remind us systematic cruelty thrives in secrecy. That silence allows oppression to endure. They remind us war crimes aren't committed only on battlefields, but in hidden rooms where vulnerable are stripped of hope. And they remind us dignity once taken can still be reclaimed through survival, through testimony, through courage to speak. Soldiers who first encountered women in 1944 never forgot what they saw. Decades later, they spoke of lessons learned. Not about tactics or victories, but about human beings' resilience. One wrote, "We thought we'd come to fight the enemy, but those women taught us what survival truly means." Comfort Women's legacy lies not in victimhood, but in resistance. Their very survival was defiance against system built to destroy them. Their testimony, when finally given, became gift to history. Reminder that humanity can endure even facing systematic dehumanization. In remembering their liberation, we honor not only horror they endured, but strength that carried them through. Their survival became their resistance. Their healing became their triumph. And their voices, once silenced, continue echoing, ensuring the world can never again claim it didn't know.